What a weekend in Sky Bet League One. Once again, let's break down all of the action in real detail. Let's go. As always, if you do find value from the content, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe. Over 60% of the people that watch the podcast aren't yet subscribed. If that's one of you, please make sure you change that. It helps me grow and expand the audience of my podcast in so many different ways. Let's begin with the first game at Lincoln City. They've scored loads of goals again. It finishes Lincoln 5, Bristol Rovers 0. The XG 1.86 to 1.45. 13 games unbeaten, 27 goals scored, 16 in 1 week, only 4 conceded. Can anybody stop Lincoln City at this moment in time? Let's go back to that, by the way. 16 goals in the last week. That is genuinely mind-blowing. Top of the form table too. They're finding one incredible level at the business end of the season. 2 points away from the top 6. The most informed side in this playoff chase. Lincoln, well, they're well and truly on course, you'd have to say. As for Bristol Rovers, don't worry, we've all been there pretty recently too, but it is still embarrassing to lose 5-0. Of course, they face the hottest team in the division right now, but from their perspective, there's so many issues that need to be resolved. From the worst possible start, dreadful body language, woeful defending throughout, regardless of the opposition, and their form, it's pretty clear Matt Taylor has got a lot of work to do ahead of next season. Take a look at the momentum graph brought to you by SofaScore. Talk about a fast start. Matt Taylor was so critical of his team post-match about the Rovers start, and so he should have been. 3 goals in 25 minutes, it's game over. On the flip side, it's a wonderful Lincoln City start, and in their current vein of form, they're thriving every time they go forward. They deal with pressure effectively, as you can see when looking at the graph with 20 minutes on the clock. There's a little bit of Rovers pressure, maybe it's a consolation, but it's still there, and they still don't concede. And when they do go forward, it seems every time they are punishing opposition. Statistically, some of the best Lincoln metrics aren't just from this game alone. This team have scored 16 goals in 7 days, only conceding once, but their chance creation is just as frightening, and even sometimes they're overperforming that as well. Over that 3-game period, they've created 13 big chances and a total expected goals of 6.83, which on its own is fantastic, but according to the numbers, their clinical ledgers meant they've scored 10 more goals than expected. I want to touch on the key principles of this Lincoln City team, and specifically this Lincoln team managed and coached by Michael Skubala. Something I've noticed is they're not fixated on complete control and having loads and loads of the ball. It's actually about moments within games. For example, yesterday they only had 40% of the ball, completing 157 passes less than the team they destroyed 5-0, which is fascinating. There's a brilliant guy on Twitter called Mike Holden who actually profiles football managers, and his words on Skubala was so interesting. So I thought I'd pick a few quotes out and read them to you now. The most hyped managers nowadays seem to be those who crave control, usually through possession, but Skubala is different. He's totally at ease with chaos and uncertainty. During his time involved with futsal, it's so much more than producing youngsters with clever feet. It's about decision making in a way that contributes to coach development just as much as player development. I thought those quotes were so interesting and gave us a brilliant insight into him as a coach, but also some vital context into what he wants to bring to Lincoln. He's starting to become one of the most talked about managers in the Football League, and the more you learn about him, the more you can see why. When touching on key players, so many Lincoln players have shone in recent weeks, but for me, Joe Taylor, he has to be the most informed player in Sky Bet League One right now. That's now 6 goals in 8 since joining in January. He stepped up, and it looks like he could be one of the most ruthless and clinical centre-forwards in the league at this moment in time. Yesterday, of course, he scored a hat-trick whilst outperforming his personal XG of 1.79. He also accumulated a 50% shot conversion rate, 8 touches in the opposition box, only being dispossessed once. Joe Taylor is on fire, and Lincoln, I mean, they're on more than fire. Can you be on more than fire? Because they are. 16 goals, 5-1, 6-0, 5-0. It is incredible. At Pride Park, it finishes Derby 1, Bolton 0. The XG 0.55 to 0.43. A performance built on grit, a robust nature, and a mentality built on the points being absolutely everything. That's the mindset of Derby County when reflecting on this game. It's not always pretty, but it's Derby County under Paul Warne. It doesn't need to be. That's not a massive surprise. It's about understanding their opposition weaknesses and being so comfortable and so secure in their own principles. And when you look at the way they beat beat Bolton yesterday, I think that observation is probably about right. When looking at Bolton, I think Tuesday and Saturday are probably the best representation of their entire season. Inconsistency remains the biggest stumbling block. As we'll break down further in a moment, the dominance, control, and between boxes, some great patterns. They're all there, but that edge was missing again. And on Tuesday, I can tell you for a fact, it definitely wasn't missing. So what's changed in a 4-day period? There's a word I'm going to use later on and actually in the next game's breakdown, and that's adaptable. How adaptable is your team? How long do you persist with plan A before being adaptable and maybe switching and changing it up? And that's a question I posed to Bolton fans when reflecting on yesterday's game and possibly their whole season. When it works, it's perfect. Look at Tuesday. That is a brilliant example. We did a breakdown, we did a video on it. That is an analysis on a Bolton team at their best. But when it doesn't, like Saturday, it looks painful. When looking at the graph, it doesn't show maybe the best game of the season, but it does show Bolton were on top for most of the second half, and that's the half they conceded late on in. So let's take a look at the stats to get a further understanding. Bolton can be the architects of their own downfall. I saw that quite a lot on Twitter after the match, and I completely understand it. Yesterday, they were again, probably architects of their own downfall. Everything was right until that final moment. The bottom line is, the robust, know-how traits of Derby will stay in games and punish wasteful teams. And when you talk about Bolton and you look at how they played yesterday, they were quite wasteful. They had opportunities and chances to punish the home side. And like I said last week, the home side aren't worried about their lack of possession. Derby don't care about the amount of ball they have. All their work is done out of possession and in fine margins. With 44% of the ball, Derby had more shots, the same number on target and the same number of big chances. They feel they can be just as effective playing in that way, and statistically and with the eye test, that is right, they can be. Going back to Bolton, I was so impressed with them on Tuesday, and of course, as much as I was painfully dealing with the fact that my side had been beaten 5-0 by Bolton, it was one of those where I was equally blown away by their football and by the way they approached that match. Go and watch the video. It's a really, I think it's a really good insight into how Bolton can be so good and on their day the best team in League One. I also made a point about Budvarsson and Collins being quite a good partnership and it working really well on Tuesday, but even that aspect of their game wasn't consistent either. The duo combined 2 shots over the 90 minutes with a total of 0.29 expected goals. Budvarsson probably should have scored from close range, a great save, and we'll come on to Joe Wildsmith in just a moment, but they only stepped in Derby's box 9 times together. It just wasn't as smooth, wasn't as slick, and ultimately wasn't as effective as it was on Tuesday. I know I've just teased it there, but my key player has to be Joe Wildsmith. I don't know if you've seen the video of Paul Warne after the game going over and jumping on his goalkeeper. He knows how good he was, and also when Derby play like that, and they do a lot of the time, that's the way that Paul Warne wants his team to approach matches. You need your goalkeeper to be on top form and deliver, and he was. 3 saves, 2 punches, 1 brilliant save to deny Budvarsson in the first half. Sheehan had an effort from long range as well, that was well saved. Multiple punches, multiple good saves. Bolton had chances, they failed to convert, but Joe Wildsmith played a big role within that. The final game in real detail, Peterborough 0, Pompey 1, the XG 0.88 to 1.06. Before we go into detail, I thought it was a really good game of football, and beyond the number of goals, a brilliant advert for League One football. 2 teams that have total intention to play a good brand, an attractive brand of football, but it's not the result Posh would have wanted, and let's start with Peterborough. Putting that result aside, it's one moment that ruins what was a very encouraging display from the hosts. Plenty of chances at both ends and brilliant saves between boxes. I'd say Peterborough were looking the most comfortable before that goal went in, but of course, as we know, the old saying, it's almost a Michael Owen saying, goals change games, and in that one moment they got caught and they come away with nothing, and they will feel hard done by. We're looking at Pompey, the team full of warriors and machines. Strike again. No obstacle is a problem. They won't fall at any obstacle. They'll find a way to win. And I've said that phrase, I think, more than ever. I sound like a broken record. I know I do. But who's surprised? Who is getting surprised? Who is surprised that Pompey just grind their way through, whoever it is, wherever it is, And that's the sign of champions. It's the biggest sign of champions. When you look at the quality of the opposition, look what they're still fighting for, that's almost a perfect away display and definitely the perfect result, no doubt about that. Pompey are now 5 points clear of second place, and thanks to the brilliant maths from Andy Moon on Twitter, I can tell you 13 points from their final 7 games will see them promoted to the Championship. It's all starting to feel pretty real now. When you start looking at numbers, you start looking at points tallies from a certain amount of games, and you've only got 7 left, and you're in this type of position, it starts to feel pretty real. When you put it like that, it's in touching distance, right? Let's take a look at the graph in front of you now. It shows a pretty balanced game, especially in the second half, but both teams are looking to cause problems in transition. It was a very end-to-end match, quite open game of football. Neither side had total control. Let's take a look at the stats, but actually look at comparing these two teams without looking at this game. You'll see what I mean. But essentially, what happens when you do compare and you do have two very similar footballing sides go head-to-head? Posh averaged the highest number of goals per 90 this season, whilst Pompey averaged the fewest number of goals conceded per 90 this season. So there's some very interesting comparison points there initially. They actually both sit in the top 2 for expected goals in League One, with Pompey just in second place, but when it comes to big chances, Posh have 7 less. So when reflecting on this match yesterday, it's no surprise it was a great watch, even if there wasn't loads of goals. Now, I teased it in the moment a second ago in the previous game, which was, of course, Derby versus Bolton. I was describing Bolton and using a few words to describe them as a team, and I used the word adaptable. And I want to use this word again with Pompey because it hasn't been said enough. This John Mousinho team, this John Mousinho Pompey side is so adaptable. We did a deep dive a few months ago into the key principles of a Mousinho team, but as the season has progressed, he's continued to show just how intelligent he is. A great example of that was yesterday. It wasn't all about control, but actually about being clever enough to find different ways to hurt an opposition. And you've got to find lots of different ways to hurt a team like Peterborough, and when plan A wasn't working, they were so adaptable in finding different ways to be effective. Portsmouth in transition are brilliant. They are absolutely phenomenal. Go and watch the goal back. Quite direct, quite quick, and ultimately it's a game-defining goal. They won't be stubborn. They'll find a way. They might take a different or alternative road, but they'll end up in the same destination, and it's a winning destination time and time again. Before we touch on key players, I've got to mention the injury list that Pompey currently have. 11 players out injured, a starting 11 worth of players unavailable. Macy, Rafferty, Paul, McIntyre, Ogilvie, Morrell, Lowry, Lane, Robertson, Tino Andrin, Callum Lang. It's a top team. I know there's a bit of a joke on Twitter about where the team would finish in this current League One season, but that's not the point of it. It's just ironic that it does make a starting 11 and a very good one. It's still some very, very key players and a hit at their squad depth, but they've just stepped up, and Yengi is a great example of that. Gavin White as well. He has been, I don't say quite rightly criticised. I think he has been. He hasn't been very good. I've got a soft spot for Gavin White with his time at Oxford United. It hasn't worked out for him, but yesterday played a crucial role in that goal. He was an example, but Yengi is an example as well. That's now 2 goals in 2 for the striker. I can tell you, he actually, out of every striker in League One, has the highest goals per 90 metric. Of course, it's important to mention he's played less games and scored less goals, but it shows when he does play, he's a natural goal scorer. I love Yengi. I love what he's about. He's a unit. He's a very quick unit, and he's got a great eye for goal as well. He is another player that, in this injury crisis, has stepped up and has delivered, along with so many, I'd say all of these Pompey players that currently are available and still ticking over some phenomenal results. So around the grounds we go. Barnsley 0, Cheltenham 0 is a final score. Derby 1, Bolton 0, Exeter 1, Burton Albion 0, Fleetwood 1, Charlton 1, a late goal for Fleetwood in that one. Lincoln 5, Bristol Rovers 0, Peterborough 0, Pompey 1, Port Vale 0, Oxford 2. We're so back, I can just feel it. We're so back, and we are back in that top 6, all jokes aside. Reading 4, Cambridge 0, Wigan 1, Blackpool 0, Wickham 2, Northampton 0, Shrewsbury 1, Carlisle 0, Stevenage 0, Leyton Orient 1. Thank you so much for watching. If you did find value, please make sure you leave a like and subscribe. Until next time, I've been Jack. This has been the Jack Wood Football Podcast. Not many games next weekend, so we'll find something else to put out for you. We'll definitely find something. But for the roundups, a nice little break, and we'll see you when we're back shortly. Take care.